Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, so like I said, I was making videos for just covering the U.S. championships. There were a couple of games that I hadn't covered, so I was like, man, I might as well just finish the whole series, right? And so for like I said, for those of you diehard chess fans that love chess puzzles and tactics, I'll be showing the answer to the previous puzzle and a new puzzle at the very end. Let me fix this a little bit. Okay, bam, there we go. We good? We looking good? Everything? Okay, cool. We straight to go. All right. So if you guys are ready, I'm ready. Let's take a look, see what we got. All right, so we have E4. Get this volume turned up. Bam. All right, so we have D6. So D4, knight to F6, knight to C3. We got E5, knight to F3, knight B to D7, bishop to C4, bishop B7, castles and castles. And so we have the Philidor Hanham or lion variation. It started off as a Pirtz, and then it got into the Philidor. And so we have A4, trying to make sure that we, clamp down on any expansion on the queen side. We want our bishop to, generally, you want your bishop to stay in this spot, on this diagonal. This will become pretty significant a little bit later. I'll make some comments about some stuff. But so we have C6, rook to E1. We have A5. H3, we don't want any knight G4 situations, or when the bishop comes out, we don't want bishop pinning or anything like that. And so we have knight to B6, and then we have bishop to F1. Yeah, like I said, it's so the bishop being on this diagonal becomes significant later. I have to admit, when I first saw this move, I was kind of surprised. I was like, bishop to F1 is just like you completely undeveloping the bishop. And so I was kind of thinking either, bishop to B3 or bishop to A2, just because you've already developed a bishop and, just kind of keeping it on this diagonal, putting that pressure on that, nice little F7 square. Because like I said you guys before, the F7 and the F2 squares are usually only defended by the king, like when you try to move rook away. So, I kind of thought it would have been beneficial to just kind of keep the bishop, on that diagonal at least to some degree. So we have E takes D4, Queen takes D4. We have D5, and so we have bishop to G5. Trying to pin down this knight a little bit, maybe being able to swing a rook over, stuff like that. So we have H6, maintaining that pressure with bishop to H4. So we have D takes E4, knight takes E4, queen takes D4, knight takes D4, and we have knight B to D5. And like I always say, guys, you always want to make sure that you're noting the exact knight that moved, because as you guys can see, these knights are very far away from each other on the board. And so if you mistakenly put the wrong knight, it's going to kind of mess up your, your analysis a little bit later on. So like I said, we do have knight B to D5. And so we have knight takes F6, bishop takes F6, bishop takes F6, and we have knight takes F6. And as you guys can see, the bishop has now come back to C4. So like I said before, I think, probably either bishop to B3 or bishop to A2 just would have saved a little bit of time. Because, we did end up getting this bishop back to that square anyway on this diagonal. So it might not be super significant, but when you're playing your games and you're developing your pieces, you're trying to make like every single move count, and you're not trying to make it to where you're kind of moving back and forth. But of course, if you're these guys, and you have a very super deep understanding of the game, you might be able to get away with it. I mean, you saw there was a game that I analyzed with Magnus Carlsen where he did the same thing. He developed the bishop and then he dropped it back and then came back and still won the game. So you're like, all right. So, I mean, every now and then these guys might be able to kind of sidestep the fundamentals and still be able to come away with a win. So we have rook to D8, C3, very general, very common way to protect the knight here, C3. And so we have king to F8. So rook to E5, bishop to D7, rook A to E1. And so we have rook to E8. So we have F4. And so we have B6. And king to F2. And so, as you can see, both sides are doing pretty good. There aren't any major threats really to either side. They've both done what they need to do as far as their development goes. You know, they're you know, they have their rooks connected. You know, white is trying to make sure that they take over this e file. So, you know, it's a fairly even game. So there's not like a, you know, there's not a lot that, you know, is really going on for either side. It's not, you know, neither side really has like a severe advantage or anything. So we have rook a to d8. So knight back to f3. So we have c5. You know, like I say before with these bishops, I mean, what that does is it discovers an attack on this pawn. But, you know, since white has a light square bishop, you know, you want to put these pawns on dark squares so they can never be attacked by that bishop, especially going into an endgame. So we have bishop to b3, and so bishop to c6. So rook takes e8 with check. Bishop takes e8, and so we have rook to e2. You know, just trying to prepare, you know, the ability for this knight to move. Of course, you can't do it now because you're just going to be dropping a pawn here on b2, so you have to try to prepare that a little bit. So we have b5, not trying to give white the ability to really do anything yet. And so we have a takes b5, bishop takes b5, rook to e5, bishop back to c6. Now, if we just back up here to rook takes e5, if you guys want to go ahead and pause the video and see what black actually missed, it's a pretty strong continuation, and it's a little bit of a different of position. So if you guys, like I said, if you want to pause it real quick and see if you can, you know, kind of see what Lenderman actually missed in this position, go ahead. All right, cool. So like I said, in this position, if we were just to run through a couple of moves, you know, we had bishop to c6, we had bishop to c4, and so we had a4, knight to e2, knight to e4, king to e3, and we had knight to d6. And so if we just kind of back up to rook to e5, Lenderman actually missed rook to b8. And so rook to b8, you know, there's not a lot of penetration that white has on this file. So it made a lot of sense to try to shift the rook over, and it creates some very real threat. So if we just run through a couple of moves, you can see that the position that we get into is a lot more passive and a lot more jumbled. So you see bishop back to d1. And so bishop will come to c6. You see rook to e2, having to try to, you know, defend this b2 pawn. Knight would come to e4. Then the king would come to e1, and you see f6. So you see, like I said before, you know, black is getting their pawns on the opposite color than the bishop. And as you can see, this is a much more passive position than the position that we had right here. You see white is more forward, and they're doing, you know, they're kind of doing a lot more. So, you know, just continuing here. So we have bishop to d3, not trying to give up that bishop. And so we have rook to e8, king to f2, rook takes e2, king takes e2. We have f6. So g3, you know, white's starting to do the same thing with their pawns, trying to put them on dark squares here. All right, so we have king to e7, knight to h4. So we have g5. So knight to f5 with check. So we have bishop knight takes f5, bishop takes f5, pawn takes f4, and pawn takes f4. And so we have king to d6, and so we have king to e3. So bishop back to e8, bishop to e4, bishop to d7, and so we have h4. So, you know, white and black has pretty much done what they wanted to do, except for the, you know, this pawn on a4, which would have to be, you know, defended by the king. And so we have bishop to e8, bishop to b1. And so I'll just kind of run through these moves. It's quite a long game, so I'll run through these moves real quick. It's a lot of shifting around and repositioning for the pieces. So we have bishop to c6, we have king to d3. So we have bishop to b5 with check, king to e4, bishop to d7, bishop to a2, bishop to c8, bishop to f7, bishop back to d7. So bishop to c4, king to c6, bishop to e2. So king to d6, bishop to d1. So we have f5 with check, king coming back to d3. And so we have bishop to e5 check, king to c2, bishop to c4, king to d2, bishop back to b5, king to c1, king to d5, bishop to c2, bishop to d7, king to b1, king to c4, king to a2, king to b5, king to a3, king to a5. And so we're on move 59 now. And so you guys can see that, you know, there's just a lot of kind of shifting back and forth with the bishops. And at the end of the day, like, I mean, same colored bishops isn't as drawn as opposite colored bishops. But this particular position is like pretty much a complete draw if they just keep like kind of shifting their pieces, you know, just like how they have been. And so, like, you know, you saw the king come over here and protect this pawn. And because, you have it attacked by the bishop. It's the only pawn that wasn't, well, I mean, this one as well, but, earlier, this was the only pawn that wasn't successfully moved away from a light square. And so, this is really the only point that white can really attack. So running through the moves again, so we have bishop to d1. So we have bishop to b5, bishop to f3, bishop to d7, bishop to h5, bishop to c6, bishop to e2, bishop to b5. Of course, we can't trade here because it's just going to be just completely drawn in game. Like it is, but it's just going to be more drawn. And so we see bishop to f3, bishop to d7, bishop to d5, king to b5, bishop to f7. So we have king to a5, bishop to c4, bishop to c8, bishop to e2. So bishop to d7, bishop to d3, bishop to e6. So bishop to e2, bishop to d7, bishop to f3, bishop to b5, bishop to d5, bishop to d7, bishop to a2, bishop to c8, bishop to b1, bishop to e6, bishop to c2, bishop to d7, and we have h5. And so this is the first point really that we get to a point where we stop shifting around and we just start to push a pawn here. So it becomes kind of a little bit of a critical situation because there was only really one move that drew, and it was bishop to e8. All of the other moves, we're pretty much either going to drop a pawn, or just allow black to get into a winning situation. So we have bishop takes f5, bishop takes f5, bishop takes h5, bishop to h7. We have king to b6. So we have f5. We have king to c7. So we have king takes a4, giving up a pawn. And so we see king to d6, king to g6, and we see bishop to f3. Now, of course, we can't go here. Let me see here. Bam. So we can't go, bishop takes. Let me do that. Let me do it right. So we can't go bishop takes because we're going to see f takes g6, king to e6, and we're going to see b4, forcing a pawn through. And c takes b4, c takes b4. And when you get into this position here, it's not possible for this king to hold both of these pawns down, so one of them is going to promote automatically. And so, like I said, we had f6 after bishop to f3. And so we have h5, king to b5, h4, bishop to f5, bishop to g2, and this is actually a losing move in this position. And so we have f7, but Wesley still actually missed b4, and after c takes b4, not taking back, but c4. And so we'd see h3, and we'd see c5 with check, king to e5, and then we'd sacrifice the bishop. And then after bishop takes, we'd be able to force this pawn through. So, like I said, we have h5, king b5, h4, bishop to f5, bishop to g2, f7, and king to e7, king takes c5, h3. We sacrifice the bishop on h3, bishop takes h3. We have c4, king takes f7. And we see king to d6, king to e8, king to c7, bishop to g2. We see b4, bishop to f1. So we're protecting with c5, b5. So we see c6, bishop to a4, king to b7, king to e7, and we see c7, and we see bishop come back to d7. That's the only way to prevent the promotion, but it's going to promote anyway. So c8 equals queen. Bishop takes c8. King takes c8. We have king to d6, king to b7, king to d7, and then we have b5. And it is in this position that Lenderman actually resigns. And basically what you're looking at in this position is the fact that, if we just kind of run through a variation, so we'd see king would come to d6, we'd see b6, king would come back to d7, and once king gets to a8, he's protecting the queening square. So, even if you come up with king to c8, we'd see b7, we'd see king down to c7, and we'd see b8 equals queen. And, it's a completely clearly won endgame. And so, like I said, Lenderman did resign, and this was the first game that they played in the U.S. Championship. So, it kind of set the tone a little bit for what came after, which, as you guys know, Wesley So did defeat all comers pretty much to become the 2020 U.S. champion. So for those of you that, like I said, are diehard tactical and puzzle people, This was the puzzle that I gave you guys before, and yeah, it was a very hard puzzle. It was something I kind of understood the idea a little bit, but I was going about it the wrong way. I kind of knew that the pressure point was e5 with this bishop, but I didn't quite know how to go about it. So the way you actually go about it is queen to b4, sacrificing the queen to deflect the queen. And like I said, it is deflection. So, you know, you would have to block with the rook, and then you would sacrifice rook on f8, and then the king would take h7, and then you would take queen takes e4 with check, and then the king would come back to g7. So you'd have bishop to e5 check, and the king would take. And then you would have bishop to g7 check, losing the queen because the king would come to g8 and the queen would take on e7. You know, of course, you couldn't take here with the queen because then that would just result in checkmate. And for some of you guys that are wondering, what if queen takes? If queen takes, then you see bishop to e5 check, king would take h7, rook would come to h3 with check, king would come down to g6. You see rook coming back over to g3 with check. The king would go to h7. You'd see rook to f7 check. The king would come down to h6. The bishop would come to f4. And then the king would be forced here. And then the rook would come over and deliver checkmate here. All right, so the next one that I have for you guys is this one here. It's pretty complicated as well. It's a deflection, and it's considered advanced. Yeah, there is that. There are those puzzles and stuff for you guys. So next video I make, I'll be putting the answer to this one here. So if you found queen to b4 in this position, you're a true gangster. I appreciate you guys coming through. Subscribe and like. Go ahead and leave me some comments. See, you know, let me know how you like everything. And I will see you guys next time. Appreciate it.